Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how I painted the trees and grasses in this painting of Mount Rainier. This is part 2 of a 2-part series, so if you haven't seen part 1, that's where I show you how to paint the mountain itself. I'm using the same supplies that I used in part 1, so cold pressed paper, a variety of round brushes, a variety of paints, and some masking fluid to protect different areas of the painting. This picture shows where we left off at the end of part 1, so you can see that the mountain itself has been painted, and now it's time to complete the rest of the painting. And as a reminder, here's the reference picture that I'm using to do this painting. Okay, so I'm going to get started by painting this grassy area that's on the left side of the painting, and it's the furthest back grassy area in the scene. I usually like to work from furthest back to closest to the viewer in my painting, and so I'm going to start with the area of the grass that's farthest away from the viewer here. So I'm just coming in with light green and adding little bits of brown and adding little bits of texture with some darker paint here and there. You can see that I've masked the trees that are in front of it, and I've also masked the bottom of the tree line to protect it during this time. So that enables me to just work on the grass without worrying about accidentally painting over the tree areas that I'm trying to keep white. Okay, so following that principle of working from areas that are farther back to closer, next I'm going to paint this area of this kind of golden grass that we have here, and I've used some masking fluid to protect the bottom edge of it, which is going to be the next row of grass. So that's basically the key to painting this foreground, is making sure to protect the layer that's below it so that you can get this kind of natural bumpy edge that grasses will have. So I wet this entire area, and then I'm coming in first with a light wash of color. It's kind of this golden brown color, and then adding little bits of texture by using some darker paint here or there. I'm really letting the water do the work for me and the paint do the work for me, and just kind of letting it spread. I'm not worrying about painting individual blades of grass because this is far enough away that that's not really realistic and it would look kind of unnatural. So I'm kind of just letting it be loose at this point. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the next layer of this golden brown grass, and you can see that when I remove the masking fluid from the top of this area, it leaves this nice bumpy grassy edge to it. And before I started this area, I used masking fluid to protect the next layer, which we're going to start getting into the green grass next, but I'm using that same approach to have a nice kind of bumpy live edge. Now I'm painting some dirt in this foreground area. I found that it usually looks more realistic if you do the dirt first and you do it wet on wet to let it just spread and have a soft edge to it. Now comes the fun part. I'm coming in with this bright green, and I'm starting to just define little grassy areas, or sort of clumps of grass, you could think of them, and each individual clump of grass is going to be lightest at the top, and then I'm going to start adding little bits of darker color at the bottom, and I'm keeping this all quite soft and loose, and it's wet on wet, and just letting it all kind of blend. Again, letting the paper and the paint do most of the work for me, and not worrying too much about very specific details, because this is still set a little ways back from the viewer, so it doesn't need to be super detailed. And in fact, it has a nice kind of natural grassy soft look when you do this wet on wet and don't add too many details. Before I started painting in this area, I did use a little bit of masking fluid to just add a couple of individual blades of grass kind of all over, and when this is done, I'm going to remove the masking fluid and paint it a very, very light green color, and that's just going to add a little bit of detail in there and preserve a little bit of light in the scene. Now I'm starting to paint the dirt in the foreground. You can see that I've masked off all the little clumps of grass individually. That's because I want to take a very careful approach to this, because I wanted to have a little bit more detail here, and in order to get realistic looking grass, in my experience, it's best to use masking fluid to protect the edges of the grass. So I'm coming in with the dirt, painting dark areas at the bottom of each clump of grass, because that's where the shadows will be. Next, I'm starting to paint the clumps of grass that are in the front. I'm using the same approach as with the other clumps of grass, where I'm painting wet on wet for each area, and I'm starting with lighter paint that is going to be lighter at the top, and then I'm adding some darker paint at the bottom and letting it blend. I'm not worrying too much about painting individual grass strokes, but I'm just adding little bits of texture here and there to give it some variation. And I'm working on this in layers, so essentially I'm starting with the layer that's farthest back in this area, and then I'm going to, once that's dry, take off the masking fluid for the next layer and paint that next layer, and then just keep working my way forward until I'm completely done with all of these layers of grass. Now it's time to paint the trees. This was pretty straightforward. I was working wet on wet and using quite dark colors because I really wanted this tree line to stand out in the painting. And so I'm starting with this section on the left and just coming in with a dark wash of this kind of grayish, greenish blue color in this whole area that I'm working in. And then as it starts drying, I'm going to come in with a thicker coat of the dark paint and just add a little bit of definition, not worrying too much about details, but just wanting to give some of the trees a little bit of extra definition. I like using the masking fluid for trees like this because it gives quite clear silhouettes to work with at this point. And, because this tree line area is so dark, technically I could have gotten away without using the masking fluid, but I like to use the masking fluid and start with the white paper every time because it helps preserve the transparency, and that's one of the most beautiful things about watercolor in my opinion, is the transparency of the medium. And so whenever possible, I like to use masking fluid and then just do things in as few layers as possible to get that kind of transparent effect. I think it's nice, but you could do this step without any masking fluid if you really wanted to, because the trees are darker than everything that's behind it. I'm going to skip some of the trees because I pretty much just followed the same approach for the whole tree line. Now I've removed the masking fluid from those little bits of grass that I mentioned earlier, and I'm painting them with a light layer of a very light greenish brown color, and it's kind of hard to tell in the video, but this did have a nice effect of making it look like there was a lot of definition in the little grassy areas by having some light areas that look pretty detailed. Now I'm painting the row of trees that's in front of the main dark tree line, and these are going to be a lighter shade of green. They're going to be a more clear shade of green as opposed to the darker bluish gray green that the rest of the trees are, and they're really going to pop out because they're lighter. And I'm also, as they're drying, adding a little bit of darker paint from the tree line colors to give each of these trees some definition and detail. And that's basically it. Here's the finished painting with all the different elements in place. So let me know what you think, if this was useful to you, if you'd like to see more videos like this. And as always, thanks for watching. Take care and happy painting.